What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Perhaps. This is episode 10. We've been doing this 10 straight weeks now, and I feel really good about it. And I appreciate you all who have been here since the beginning, which is funny to say because in some ways it feels like I just started this thing, but in other ways it feels like, no, we've been going 10 weeks. Like, I have some friends, some local close friends that in the beginning, they're like, hey, man, I listen to every episode. Back when we had like 3 episodes. And now they're behind. Which is like a cool feeling to have like so much of Perhaps out there that people are even able to get behind. And the reason that it feels good to me is because the podcast started after a really long time of having a lot of difficulty starting to make stuff online again. And so this really gave me a real good boost creatively because I had to show up every week. But it's also given me a boost in a lot of other areas of life, like my main YouTube channel, which I just put up a video yesterday. We'll get to the topic of the episode, everybody. Vibe with me. It's okay. It's a podcast. But I really want you all to check out that video if you haven't already. It's called something about the church should be the first to protect immigrants, not the last. And it's about how some churches are faithfully fighting back against Trump's reversal of taking away the rights of sanctuary organizations. And because churches were able to hold immigrants, house them, protect them, and there were ICE guidelines where you couldn't, or they're discouraged from enforcing in those sanctuary areas and those sensitive protected areas. And Trump reversed that. And so there's a lot going on right now with that and mass deportations, who ICE is really going after, and all the misinformation around ICE and around immigrants in general. And so please check that out. I worked a really long time and worked really hard on it. And today I just posted it after staying up all night finishing it because I really wanted to get it out as soon as possible. And so when I sat down, actually when I posted it this morning, I was like, oh no, I have to record a podcast later. And I'm like so out of it because I hadn't slept. And so I slept like a little bit, like a couple hours, and then had to get back up and do some other stuff and then get ready for this podcast. And I was a little doubtful. This episode is about doubt. And it's Lent. Oh yeah, I forgot to say that. This is a part of a longer Lent series. Oh yeah, that's why I'm in all black. I'm back, baby, in all black. I got black nails. I got a black jacket, a black t-shirt, a black beanie. I got black pants. Yeah, you can't see. I got black shoes. I promise. This is all legit, okay? I gotta go all out for Lent. And I want to be able to, keep going in this series every week leading up to Good Friday and Easter, giving you a different perspective on Lent and some of the themes that people usually talk about during Lent. And so, doubt. Yeah, I was a little doubtful about today and unsure if I would be able to do it. But I really wanted to like hold true to like getting this thing out every Friday. It's late Thursday night right now. And what's interesting about that doubt is to ask, what really is that doubt? Instead of immediately feeling bad about it, because that's the thing, we all experience doubt. And something a lot of us also feel is feeling bad about having doubt. There's this Buddhist concept called the second arrow, where you have a negative emotion, or rather an emotion that you would perceive as negative, or I think maybe a better way to put it is an undesired emotion. like sadness, anger, jealousy, anxiety, doubt, which is all super normal. We all have those feelings. That's the first arrow. It's like you experience something or you sense something that makes you feel that outside of your control. That feeling just comes on its own. But then the second arrow is you feeling bad about feeling that way, or you getting mad at yourself for feeling that way. You scolding yourself for feeling that way. Like, no, I'm not supposed to think that way. I'm not supposed to feel angry right now. I'm not supposed to be sad. I have to be positive. I have to be happy. I can't doubt right now. I have to have faith. I have to trust myself. That's the second arrow, which feels way worse and makes that negative emotion last even longer. It feels like you're trying to swat it away so you don't feel it for a long time. But really, you're just strengthening that emotion that you don't want to have. And so it's a concept in Buddhism as a part of this larger way of detaching and seeing the emptiness in all things instead of assigning so much made up meaning to everything. And it's about learning to let these emotions pass through you. Because that's actually what naturally happens. You have a sensation outside of your control. And then you have an emotion in response to that sensation outside of your control. Maybe some thoughts. I mean, some people would put thoughts and emotions together, but I think daily, a lot of us experience them as feeling kind of different. But yeah, maybe you have some thoughts as well in response to those emotions and that sensation. And then it could just keep passing right through you. Or you could grab a hold of it and say, why am I feeling this way? Or I shouldn't feel this way. Or I want to feel this way. And you grab a hold of it and strengthen it and add more emotions and add more thoughts to it. And so I say all that to try to give you a different perspective of emotions in general before we dive into doubt. Because with that perspective, consider, instead of immediately swatting away your doubt, stopping and asking, what is this doubt? Why am I having this doubt? When does it come up? Why does it come up? Like, think, for example, me getting ready to do this podcast and having doubt about whether I should do it or not, or could do it or not. There's two angles to this. There's the angle that I think we're used to talking about, where we're used to trying to swat away our doubt, and we could come at it from the perspective of doubt is bad. Don't let that doubt overtake you. You have to trust yourself. You have to have faith, or stop trying to be perfect. Just go for it. But there's this other perspective, this other angle, which is to ask, okay, well, why does that doubt come up? Sure, there's like insecurities that I have that I should work on not giving so much control of my life to. Sure, we all get that. But what about the perspective that I want to be able to do a good job at this? Like, all of you here watching me, I appreciate every single one of you, or listening to me on this podcast. I appreciate every single one of you, and I don't want to come on here and just, I don't know, and not be able to give you something worth listening to. I also don't want to push myself too hard and make myself burn out. I also want to have some like grace with myself, and if I do ever need to skip a day or skip a week, then that should be okay. And so this doubt that comes in and says, whoa, Damon, maybe you shouldn't do this podcast today. Like, maybe you won't do a good job, or maybe you're pushing yourself too hard. Maybe this just isn't the right time. That's all like healthy doubt that comes up to make sure that I'm okay. Doubt is actually a necessary part of life. It's a necessary part of reasoning. You get an idea, and then you get some doubt. It's like, maybe that's not such a good idea. But then you go back and forth with it. Would it be a good idea to do a podcast today, even though I'm pretty tired and a bit exhausted? No, it wouldn't be. The other side, no, it wouldn't be a good idea. What about the other side? Well, you don't have to be perfect. Like, you don't have to, and you're able to put something together, and I think you're able to do it. Damon, me talking to myself, and then the other side being like, but you gotta make sure you have grace with yourself. The other side being like, yeah, but also having grace with myself is not being able to be perfect. And so it's like, it's this reasoning back and forth, and you don't want to go too far in that analysis back and forth, but it's just a normal, necessary part of life and reasoning and decision making. And I appreciate that doubt that came up in that situation. I needed that to help me make a good decision. And so I want to start with that perspective of doubt, more of that neutral perspective of doubt, before we get in a bit deeper and talk about doubt when it comes to spirituality and faith, or self-doubt, or doubting the things that were taught to us. Like, this can be a really heavy conversation that is so heavy that it's scary. Or it could be a bit lighter when we're able to have a more neutral view on doubt. Because if you grew up like me in a more fundamentalist Christian household and fundamentalist Christian church, then you know what it's like to be scared of doubt, to be anxious about feeling doubt. Almost like it's a dark, evil sin to feel doubt. They always say, like, you have to have faith. Don't doubt. Or there's some versions of fundamentalist Christianity that's very similar to a type of New Age thinking that also is constantly swatting away anything perceived as negative. And it doesn't allow you to feel the full spectrum of human emotion. You see that in both those circles. And some versions of, like, what people could call word of faith Christianity, and some, not all, of a version of, like, manifestation, law of attraction type of spirituality. Some, not all. I've seen diversity in people who have those kinds of beliefs and principles. There's a version of it that suppresses these emotions, that labels certain things like sadness, anger, jealousy, doubt as undesirable, completely negative, and need to push away as much as possible because we have to be positive and happy all the time. And then you burn out because you need to be fake all the time. But these emotions are normal. They're part of life. And so that took me a while to learn. Of course. And it's funny, I remember how scary it used to be. Now it's just, it's I'm able to talk about it so freely. But there was a time where I couldn't. I grew up in church, and then when I was 18, I felt called into ministry. But the beginning of that journey was an experience of great doubt about God, about the things I was taught about God, things I was talking about Jesus and the Bible and everything. And I wanted to actually explore for myself what I actually believe and what other people actually believe. Let me grab this book about hell. Also, let me grab this other book that's arguing the opposite perspective of hell. Let me grab this book about like a more historical reading of the Bible. Let me grab this book about a different way of viewing the death of Jesus on the cross and what it actually means. And let me grab this book that says original sin is actually like a made up concept that isn't in the Bible. Let me grab this. So it's like, and the more controversial, the better, because I wanted to get a wide perspective. And at the time, it was so scary. I ended up joining this program in Orange County. I grew up and now live in Santa Maria, which is like Central Coast, California. You know that, if you don't know the shape of California, it like goes down and then there's a corner where it curves. I live like basically on that corner of California. And then Orange County is like 5 hours south of me. And so I went and lived in Orange County for 2 years when I was 19. And it was part of this ministry internship type program, training to be a ministry. Also, we took online Bible college classes, and we lived next door to the church, and we're constantly doing ministry stuff. And it was supposed to train us to become ministers. And it was a 2-year program. And every day we were like reading the Bible together, learning about ministry and God, and involved in every part of the church every day. And oh man, I lost my train of thought of how I got here. But I told y'all I'm tired a bit, but it's okay. We're vibing. It's a podcast. It's okay. That's why the first episode of this was called "It's a Podcast," because it is. That's just how it is. But anyway, I did want to bring up me being in this program, but I seem to have forgotten the exact reason I brought it up right now. Remembering how scary it used to be. Yeah. And so, and I was reading a lot, and the more controversial, the better. Oh, I remember now. When I was in this program and I would buy these books and read like these controversial ones, I got into this habit of when I would put a book down, I would put it down with the cover facing down, because I didn't want people to see it and to question me about it and argue with me about it. And then it just became a normal habit. Like, I think I still do it to this day. Like, every time I put a book down, it's with the cover face down on the table. And it's so funny. And I got into a lot of arguments with people about it. But at the same time, there are a lot of people in that church who felt safe coming to me because I was more open-minded and willing to talk about my doubt and willing to talk about other perspectives. And so I remember I had a friend who was doing ministry there, and he was working on getting his pastoral license, which I ended up starting the process to get my pastoral license through that same denomination a few years later. But I ended up stopping and leaving the church and leaving evangelicalism and conservative Christianity altogether, like in the middle of my licensing process. And so I never finished that. But I was trying to like change things from the inside for a while until I realized, no, I can't do this. This isn't going to work. And so, yeah, this just ain't my thing. And so I left and started talking about what I really believe on YouTube, and that ended up leading here. But my friend, who was going through the pastoral licensing at the time, he knew that I had some different ideas about hell. Like, I don't believe it's like biblically accurate to say that God is going to send a bunch of people to hell to be tortured forever and ever. And there's a lot of Christian theologians in the first few centuries who also didn't believe that. And they talked about it, and it was like a normal thing. That stream within Christianity who believe that God would ultimately save everyone has always been there. And of course, we could go so much deeper on this, but that's not the point of this story. But I had a friend who knew I was open to like these other beliefs about hell. And so anyway, and by the way, for those who don't know, like the belief that God would ultimately save everyone, usually people who believe that are called universalists, like God, like universal salvation type of thing. That's important context. And so he comes up to me one day after a Sunday service, and he looks like scared, and he pulls me aside and he wants to talk in private. And he says, "Hey man, so like I know you have like different views about like heaven and hell, and I was reading the Bible every day. I need to tell you this. And I was reading the Bible, and I was reading Isaiah, and I came across this verse that seemed to point to this other view. And I think it was, I don't remember if he told me, but or I figured it out later, that it was the verse that just briefly says that all flesh will be saved. And Jesus actually quotes that in Luke. And yeah, we could go through this whole thing. There's a lot of verses in the Bible that also seem to point toward universal salvation, but that's another topic. Okay, I love this stuff. Okay, so I'm trying to stop myself from going on too much of a tangent. Anyway, he's like, I was reading Isaiah and I came across this verse, and then he said, and then I like had a universalist thought. And he said it with such shame that it was almost like he was confessing to me, like, I had a lustful thought about another woman besides my girlfriend or my wife. Like I thought about cheating on my wife type of thing. He wasn't married, but like that was the level of shame he said this to me with, of I had a universalist thought. But at the time, it made complete sense. I'm laughing about it now, but at the time, I was straight-faced and he was even more straight-faced. And I was just listening to him. And he said, and he was telling me, like, I don't know what to do. He was genuinely scared. And so he asked, like, what do you think I should do? And I said, I think you should explore that. Not because I necessarily wanted him to think like me, but because at that point realized the best way to approach these big questions about faith isn't to run away from it and avoid other perspectives, but to dive in and see what it's about. Even if you come out realizing, oh yeah, no, I don't believe that. It's better to dive into it if it's such a big question you have, instead of just pushing it away. And so I said, I think you should explore it. And I was starting to like talk about my reasoning, but he like cut me off, and he said, he looked around again, and then he whispered so aggressively to me, he like, I can't do that. I'm about to be licensed. I'm about to be licensed. I can't even say, if you're watching the video version, I can't even repeat that with a straight face like he did. Like this emotional soap opera. I keep smiling. I gotta lock in. I gotta show off my acting chops right here. I'm about to be licensed. I'm about to be licensed. Now I think my smile was quivering up. I can't. Because I want y'all to realize this was a very serious moment at the time that only became funny later. And then his girlfriend started to walk up toward us. And then he's like, we'll talk about this later. And then we never talked about it again. But he ended up leaving ministry too, like a couple years or a few years later. But yeah, and I think he's definitely like a lot more free now. I haven't talked to him in several years, but the point where it started to become funny for me wasn't until a couple years later when I went to an Episcopalian church for the first time. And Episcopalians are a lot different than the type of Christians that I grew up with. It was this little Wednesday morning service. And a lot of Episcopalians are a lot more progressive and a lot of different things, politically and theologically. And it was my first time there, and the priest, who was a woman, which was also kind of different for me, even though my church fully believed in women in ministry and the denomination was started by a woman, I still hadn't seen that many women preachers. And so, anyway, I'm just trying to paint the picture for you for how different this was. And so she read the scripture, this passage from Luke, where Jesus tells this parable about how some people will say to Jesus on Judgment Day, come to Jesus on Judgment Day, and Jesus or God will turn them away and say, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." And they'll be thrown into weeping and gnashing of teeth. And there's also other perspectives of the verses like that, and how to understand the context of what exactly did people mean by weeping and gnashing of teeth. What are the cultural references and all this stuff? Of course, we're not going to get into that. And so she read this, closed the Bible, big old Bible, looked at us, and began her homily, sermon, talk. And she said, "Now, I don't agree with Luke." Referring to the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel according to Luke, that she just read from. She just closed it and said, "I don't agree with Luke." Which at the time was terrifying for me to hear. I never would have heard anything like that in church growing up. And then she said, she broke down a different way of thinking about heaven and hell. And she kind of had this belief that ultimately God would save everyone, but through a kind of purgation process where some people have to be purified in the afterlife of their sin, where God, and this has also been a view in Christianity since the beginning, this view that hell is a thing, but it's not a place where people are tortured forever. It's a place where people's sins are burned away, not where sinners are burned away. Which, like I said, was a totally different view than what I grew up with. And after I talked to her and the main priest, who was also a woman, and met them, told them a bit about myself. And at the time I was still going to that old church, and we're looking at the different books they had and talking about different perspectives. And I told them this story about my old friend who confessed to me that he had a universalist thought and said, "I'm about to be licensed." And I wasn't saying it with a smile. I was just saying this story that I thought was interesting in relation to these different views. And when I told that story, they both burst out laughing, which for the first time gave me permission to laugh. And to realize how funny that story actually is. Now when I say it, I can't help but smile multiple times throughout the story because of how silly the whole thing is. Which is so interesting. I didn't even realize that actually. I literally can't tell the story without smiling and laughing. I didn't realize that until now, I mean. And that was powerful for me, just being in that room, just laughing about that story with these two priests who knew way more than me. And also, this other time, keep that in mind, by the way, because I want to talk about being able to hold things lightly. But let me tell you another story real quick, a quicker story. When I was in that program, I was experiencing a lot of doubt. But looking back, I think the reason I was experiencing so much doubt was because I was constantly required to have so much belief about so many things. And so doubt came up naturally because there's a lot that they are requiring me to believe and affirm that I was questioning. And I started writing on this personal blog thing, and I wrote a piece about doubt. And it wasn't even me trying to like vent. It was me trying to like give people hope who are also going through doubt. And I compared myself to this disciple that's briefly mentioned in the book of Mark. When Jesus is arrested and his disciples scatter, it says one of them, and doesn't name him. Like, it almost feels as if he was just a random guy that happened to be walking by, but he seems to be one of the disciples, or maybe not even maybe one of the like 12 original, like main 12, but maybe one of the other ones. Who knows? But he's not named. And he said he was just wearing like a white sheet. And as he was running away, the soldiers grabbed at his sheet and pulled it off, and he ran away naked. And that's it. It just moves on. It's so weird. So I remember reading, some scholars wondered, was that the writer of this gospel? Like, was that Mark? Or who was that? And it's such a funny little verse. But so I wrote about, like, it's interesting, like this guy who was so terrified that he ran away naked, and then we never hear from him again. Like, dude didn't even come back after everything. Like, when Jesus came back, I don't know what happened to him. And I said, sometimes I'm afraid of becoming that, of becoming so overwhelmed with doubt that I end up betraying Jesus and running away. And running away vulnerable, running away naked. And it was just, I was trying to be deep and clever, and I put it out. I think some people in the church were worried about it. People were talking behind my back. It kind of got me in a little bit of trouble, which was annoying. But I was actually trying to like help people. I was trying to like help people realize that, hey, it's okay. Like, doubt is okay. Everyone feels it. And then I got this email from a reader, and I think their name was Augustus Waters, something like that. And this person just told me like how much they really appreciated me writing this piece, and how much it deeply resonated with them, and how they also have these secret fears and doubts, and are also afraid of abandoning God and what that would mean, and they feel like they can't talk to people about it. And then like a week later, one of my friends who was in the program with me, she told me she was Augustus Waters. And it was so dramatic, by the way. We're young and in a very strange place. And I think Augustus, she got the name from A Fault in Our Stars. I think that guy's name is something Augustus, or Augustus something. I never read it, but but it was so funny. Well, it wasn't funny at the time. Again, it's one of those things. At the time, it was so serious, and then only later does it become hilarious. But she was so scared, and she felt like she had to send this anonymous email. And then we were able to talk about it openly and freely, and it was a great conversation and a great friendship. We were able to be open like that with each other. It was awesome. But it's wild that she felt so scared to be open in the first place. Now compare that with another friend in the program. This other woman, young woman, who's younger than me, I think she was like 18, 19, while we were in the program, she had just started going to church for the first time like a year prior. And so she was still like learning a lot of things that a lot of us in the program had already known because we grew up in the church. And at the same time, being trained to be in ministry. And so one day I was going through one of my doubt phases and reading a lot and learning a lot of different perspectives and realizing like, oh, there are a lot of theologians that are able to read the Bible differently and realize that a lot of the things in the Bible shouldn't be read literally, more like literarily, and meaning read it for what it is, for the type of literature it is, which there are myths in the Bible. There are obviously parables in the Bible, but there are ways of writing truth through story that doesn't have to be literally true. And Jesus did that through parables, but he likely learned that because that's what they were doing in the Hebrew Bible too. And so, it's not an attempt to say like, okay, this part's really happened, this part didn't really happen. It's a way of saying, no, the Bible is a different type of book that doesn't split things up like that. And so I was just struggling with that because I was surrounded by people that would say you have to take everything in the Bible literally and think every little thing really happened. Jonah really did get eaten by a fish and all that stuff. And I told this other friend who had just, I confided in her, this other friend who had just started going to church like a year before and was in this ministry program with me. And then she stopped me and she was like, wait, people believe that everything in the Bible really happened? And this was my friend who was in this program with me, who was really like, who's in it, faithful, reading the Bible together every day, doing ministry together every day. And it was such like, what's the word? I don't remember the real word I'm trying to think of. I want to say like side swipe. It was like where you just get totally caught off guard of like, wait, you don't know that? I'm standing here so like distressed of like, I'm realizing these other perspectives make a lot more sense. And I'm starting to feel like, yeah, there's a lot in the Bible that we should read differently, not in a way of throwing it all away, but in a way of reading it for what it is and seeing the powerful spiritual truth in it still, but just having a better reading of it. But I was scared because the people around me were saying, no, you have to believe everything literally happened exactly as it said, as if it's a textbook. And so and then this friend is like, wait, that's what we believe? And she said she didn't know that any Christians believed every single thing in the Bible literally happened. And I was standing there thinking like, oh my God, that freedom that she had before I just shattered that for her. And it was like chill for her. It was normal for her to be like, oh yeah, I don't know if this part or that part happened, but it's not about that. And that's the right way to read the Bible. But anyway, I tell you these stories to show you the difference between holding these things so heavy that they're terrifying. The difference between that and holding things lightly. And over time, I realized doubt, not only is it a normal part of life, but it's a normal part of faith. Doubt isn't the opposite of faith. Certainty is the opposite of faith. And what's even more interesting is you see people doubting throughout the whole Bible. I mean, people always point to doubting Thomas. After Jesus comes back from the dead, Thomas says, I don't buy it. I gotta put my fingers through your wounds. And then he believes, and it's that story is taught as a way of being like, don't be like doubting Thomas. But what's also interesting, I think it's in Matthew, because that doubting Thomas story is in John, but yeah, in Matthew, Jesus, when he's about to ascend after he's resurrected, people are gathered around and he gives them the Great Commission. And then it says, and some worshipped and some doubted. Yeah, I just found it. It's Matthew 28:17. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Actually, it's right before he does the Great Commission. So it says they worshipped him and some doubted, but Jesus doesn't correct the people who are doubting. He gives all of them the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that really meant a lot to me when I realized that. And I realized that's a normal part of any community. And something that we also totally twist about the Bible and faith and religion in general is that we individualize it way too much. And that's like a modern post-Enlightenment Western thing that we do, that individualism. But these ancient sacred texts are always talking about community and how to live in community and how to act as a community and what values to have and beliefs to have as a community. And I strongly believe that that is how Jesus saw something like faith. I mean, you see like Paul in 1 Corinthians talk about spiritual gifts. And I grew up in a church where spiritual gifts were talked about as a very individual thing. Figure out what spiritual gifts you have that God has given you personally and how you can live out those personal spiritual gifts. But Paul talks about like, yeah, you gather together and someone will teach, someone will sing a song, someone will have a word, a prophetic word, someone will have an interpretation. And it's like, it's not that person will always do this part and that person will always do this part. It's like you gather together as a community and these gifts will emerge. Sometimes someone will do this, sometimes someone will do that. It's not the individual that has gifts. It's the community that has gifts. And I see faith in that way now too. In community. A community has faith, not the individual. And when you get to the individual level, some are worshiping, some are doubting all the time. And that's just how it is. And sometimes the ones who were worshiping last week are doubting this week. The ones who were doubting last week are worshiping this week. But that's just part of it. It's the community that has, and if you are struggling to have any sort of faith in a faith community, you don't need to make yourself feel so bad about it, because it's the community that has faith on your behalf when you don't have it. And doubt is a necessary part of learning and growth. And so when you're the one in the community that's doubting, you could be the one in the community that helps them move forward by saying, I don't know if we should do this as a community. I don't know if this actually is as good of an idea as we think it is. I don't know if this is as inclusive as we think it is. I don't think this would be a good program. I don't think this would be a good teaching. Like, that's all necessary for growth. We need the doubters. And some of us are doubters more, way more than worshipers, but that's okay. That's totally okay. And that part about like the individualism of these kinds of things in a post-Enlightenment Western view, I believe that's also how belief became so central to religion. Before European colonization, religion was more like about the things you do, the practices you have in a community. And then you see through European colonization, as these Christian Europeans came into contact with these indigenous people that had completely different cultures and practices in Africa and in America, the way to try to meld those cultures together, one of the ways, was to force them to become Christians, but their culture was so different that they couldn't just change them to act the way that they did. And so the way around that was to get them to have the same ideas in their head as they did. If you believe all these things about Jesus and God and the afterlife and all this other stuff, the Bible, all that, then you're a Christian. Then you count as one of us white Christians. And these colonizers go around, and it's the Christian colonizers that invented the concept of world religions. Like world religions is like something you could study like in college and see like, oh, this culture has this religion and how they practice their faith, and this culture has these religious practices and the rituals, blah, blah, blah. But the cultures they came across, they didn't view it as like, oh yeah, this is my family life, this is the cultural stuff we do, this is stuff we do for fun, and this is my religion. No, it was just all one. This is just what we do. This is just our culture. This is just how we live. And so, like the word Hindu, that word came from the interpretation of Christian colonizers putting a label on what they saw Indians doing. It's like, oh, this is your religion, and our religion is called Christianity, and your religion is called Hinduism. The word Hindu just came from the Sanskrit word Shindu, which referred to the Indus River. But when you take away the European colonizers, their faith was just what they do. It's just their culture. It's just what we do, what we believe, and how we act together. But it's only when you turn religion into, we over here have these ideas in our head, and you over there have those ideas in your head, that you get the concept of religion as its own category, apart from culture and belief and ritual and all that. And so, oh man, when we realize that, I think that helps things become a lot more lighter as well. It's like, faith doesn't have to be about having all the right ideas in your head. It's about how you live. It's about what you do. And I think some of you out there are able to hold this stuff lightly, like I've been able to. And some of you out there are having a hard time holding this kind of stuff lightly. It feels too heavy still, too scary still. But I just want to give you permission to doubt. Take a leap of doubt, my friends. It's Lent. This is the time to be more introspective, to be a little bit more somber, to live a little bit differently, and think and believe a little bit differently. It's okay. And I think there's a lot of people who struggle to walk away when they need to let go of certain beliefs that are actually really unhealthy and harmful, and to even walk away from faith communities when they need to. But you can walk away for a while. I think a lot of people are scared of like, well, what would God think? I mean, even the concept of like a church service separate from life is a concept that didn't exist in Bible times or Jesus times. It's a much later concept. That's definitely a lot more cultural. And so I don't think, like, because of that, I think God cares more about people being in community than that community needing to be an official, like, nonprofit church thing. like it's a building that you go to every Sunday morning at the same time. Like, I think it's more like live in community, take care of each other in community, explore your faith together in community. I think it's more about that. But even if God was a God that required you to go to church, which I don't think that's what it is, but even if, I also think God would be fine with you walking away from the church in this era and in the United States, where most churches are, I would say, very not Christ-like, are very like bigoted, very exclusive. And it reminds me of like the come-outers during the early slavery abolition era, there were most churches, most Christian churches, approved of and argued for and justified slavery, and used the Bible to justify it. But there were a lot of people in those churches that were changing their beliefs and felt like, no, this is wrong. And I can't be a part of a church that believes that this is okay and that fights for it. And so they left. And at the time, those people were called come-outers. Like there's old essays you can find that even use the word kind of casually, like so-and-so who is a come-outer. And I think back on that, and I think we're able to have more grace with those people than we're able to have with ourselves today. We're able to see like, oh yeah, that makes sense. If you live in an era where most Christian churches believe that slavery is okay, and you feel like, I can't be a part of church right now, I got to get out of here because this is just the state of the church right now, we're able to look back and be like, yeah, that makes sense. But now, I think people in the future will look back on our time the way we look back on them and be like, oh yeah, the people who couldn't be in church because most churches were extremely homophobic and transphobic and supported far right-wing policies. Oh yeah, it makes sense that some people felt like they needed to go. And if you ever go back to a church, if you find a spiritual community that you do feel good in, it should be because you're looking for something to gain, not because you're trying to avoid something, trying to avoid punishment or trying to avoid feeling guilty for not going to church or whatever. So it's okay to walk away for a while and to not know if or when you would come back. That's okay. And I'm still connected to a church, but I actually haven't gone in quite a while. But they're still my homies. But that's just where I'm at in life right now. That's just what's going on right now. But I'm not. I hold that lightly too. I'm not like, I don't go to church. I just haven't gone in a while, and that's just what it is. But yeah, there are some good ones out there. But it's hard to find, especially depending on where you live. And so, my friends, take a leap of doubt. Doubt is a normal part of life and a necessary part of life. I encourage you to practice not just immediately swapping it away, or what's the word? Not swapping. I forget the word. I am tired. I told y'all I'm tired. What's the word? Swatting. That's the word. And not immediately swatting it away. You got this, people. Let me know what you think. Follow me on everything, and links in the description. Check out my Patreon for bonus episodes, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.